I am back to do chapter 5. I literally rolled out of bed 10 minutes ago and I'm in PJs. This is the best job ever. All right, I know I see this every single time that this is going to be a short chapter. I'm not going to talk a whole lot, and then it ends up being longer than the previous chapter. This PowerPoint, as you can see, is a lot more slides, but there's a lot of slides that are just a picture. So I really do want to shave these down and get them a little less lengthy. So I'm going to do my very, very best to shorten that up. All right, so let's talk about chapter 5, sensation and perception. Let's see, I haven't looked at this chapter in a while, so give me a second to get my thoughts together. Chapter topics, we're going to talk about all the senses and sort of how they interact, and then we're going to talk about perception. Pretty cut and dry. All right, let's differentiate these two terms first of all. So sensation and perception are actually two very, very different things, okay? Sensation is the process through which the senses pick up stimuli and transmit it to the brain. So, in other words, you can taste something, right? You don't know what, because that's perception, but there is a sensation of, what is that in my mouth, right? Or you feel something. You have no idea what it is, but you know that there is a presence on your skin, all right? That is a sensation. Or you hear a sound, or you, smell something, or you see something. So these are your senses, right? Your 5 senses. And there is some detectable amount of stimuli, but it has not yet been cognitively processed. So that is a sensation. Now, perception is the process by which the brain actively organizes and interprets that sensory information. So first you see it, then your brain goes, what is that? Oh, that's a dog. And then we have perception. So very important to understand the difference between these two things, sensation and perception, because sometimes the mind will play tricks on you. All right, let's talk about thresholds real quick. Thresholds, there's something called the absolute threshold. It's the minimum amount of sensory stimulation that can be detected 50% of the time. Now let's skip to the end of that sentence. Why 50% of the time? Well, because some days you're just really in tune with things, right? Some days your hearing works better than others. Some days your sight works better than others. Some days your sense of feel or touch, all of your senses work better than others. So it is important to sort of get rid of those statistical outliers when you're having a particularly good day where you're hyper-focused. Maybe you had a Red Bull, right? And you're like in the zone, concentrating and hyper-vigilant to your surroundings. We're not going to really count that because that's not how you just are normally, all right? So we're gonna get rid of those. And then there's also those days that you're just exhausted, tired, mentally fatigued, maybe a little depressed. You could get hit by a truck and not really feel it. So there's the other end of that spectrum, right? Days where you don't feel hardly anything and days where you're highly tuned into everything. So if we get rid of all of those outliers, what we're left with is what's probably the average, right? So that's why that's included in there. So what is the difference if I'm at the gym and I got 225 on, right? And I'm bench pressing 225, and then somebody comes and puts those 2-pound weights on. Am I going to notice a difference? Am I going to be busting out reps at 225, and then they put on an extra 4 pounds, and I'm like, I'm stuck, right? Is that going to happen? Probably not, right? Am I going to notice a difference? Arguable. And here's why. Because what is the percentage? That's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the proportional difference. This is Weber's law, named after Max Weber, who's a Gestaltist, who we'll talk about at the end of the chapter. He stated that the just noticeable difference, that's what that stands for, JND, the just noticeable differences of all the senses depend on a proportion of change rather than a fixed amount. In other words, let's get away from the weights for a second and let's talk about sound, right? So sound is measured in decibels. If I played a sound that was 51 decibels and then turned it down to 50 decibels, would you notice a difference? Probably not. It probably doesn't meet this threshold of change, okay? So it's kind of like whenever the TV is really, really loud and somebody says, hey, can you turn the TV down a little bit? Has anybody in the history of time ever picked up the remote and gone, boop, one time? No, because it's almost imperceivable the difference in volume if you just one time, one time up or one time down. So what do? We go up, 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 up. Oh, that's a little too loud. Down, right? We go up until we notice the difference, and then we're like, oh, that's a little too much, and then we come back down, or vice versa. We go down, and they're like, oh, now I can hear it, and then we go back up again, right? So that's important that we don't try to figure out, well, how much louder does it have to be for us to notice the difference? Well, it depends on how loud it was to begin with. If it was barely perceptible and then we went one notch more perceptible, we would notice a difference. If it was completely imperceptible and we hit the sound one time and now we can perceive it, even though that's still a change of only one, we went from can't detect it to can detect it. Okay? So that's what this is referring to, these threshold rules. All right, so let's look at kind of the criteria a little bit. So for weight, so not all of the senses are as finely tuned as other ones, right? So when it comes to sense of touch, how heavy something is, it needs to be about a 2% difference on average to notice it, and that's 50% of the time again. So there is no real perceivable difference in 100 pounds and 101 pounds to most people. Now I'll get to why that says most in capital letters in just a second. So again, when we're gonna go up in weights, that's part of the reason that you don't see, other than the clutter, right? You don't see at weights at gyms. You don't see weights that are half pounds and pounds and all that kind of stuff, right? They're usually 5-pound increments, roughly. Maybe 10-pound increments. Every once in a while, you'll see the little 2.5 pound. I have no idea who uses those or why, but that's why, right? When we won't want to notice something is heavier, right? It needs to be more than 2% before we even realize that it's heavier, right? We can't feel much of a difference. So, in auditory stimulus, tone variance can be detected in about 0.33%. So, look at the difference here between that's a third of a percent versus 2%. That is how much better our ear is at distinguishing difference than our sense of touch. So again, if I just put a little, ounce of something on the palm of your hand, you might not even feel there's anything there. If I put something that's 5 pounds and I added, a third of a percent of that, I don't know what the math is on that. Let's say that it's an ounce. If I put an ounce with that, you're not going to notice the difference. But if I play a tone and then I change it by a third of a percent, you're probably going to notice a difference, especially if you can match it with another tone. So if I play this tone at like a B flat, and then I take another tone and I change that tone just a third of a percent from a B flat to like a sharp B flat, or a B flat that's a little extra flat, you're going to notice that they don't sound like they're in harmony with each other. So our ears are much more finely tuned. Now, the reason this says most people aren't going to notice a difference, just like anything else, the more you do something, the better you usually get at it, right? So some people, for instance, chefs, wine tasters, or they're called sommeliers, they have a refined palate that's so refined through so many years of practice that they can detect much more minuscule changes than what this is. So if you're a gym rat and you go all the time and you've been going all the time for like as long as you can remember, can you notice a difference between 225 and, let's say you're on, like, say, the Smith machine, which is basically 2 rails that go up and down and then a bar that slides up and down on the rail? Not all Smith machines are the same because there's, they grease that for the friction, and so the bar itself weighs a certain amount, usually 45 pounds. So let's say you put 225 on, that's including the 45-pound bar, and you're on the Smith machine. Then you go to the Smith machine next to it, same exact machine, same manufacturer, same exact weights. You might notice it feels a little different, right? Maybe there's a little bit more tension in the pulley. Maybe there's just a little bit thicker grease, which is cutting down that friction just a tad. And if we were to measure the difference, we might see like there's a 1 pound difference. Well, that doesn't meet this 2% threshold. So 99% of the population, they're not going to notice a difference on that because it doesn't meet the threshold. But, there's always a but, right? There's always a caveat to the rule. Some people, through experience, are going to refine their abilities just enough that they will be able to tell a difference, even though most people can't. All right? So, let's see. Did I see everything here? This can be gained through practice, attention, and frequent exposure. So, practice. So, yeah, and this goes for all of the different senses. So, I was watching the other day an old episode of The Amazing Race, and they had a little thing that they had to do. They had all these different chemicals, and they were like scents, and they had to mix together a certain formula to make a perfume. And if they did it right, then they went to take it to this lady who would smell the perfume, and she would say, "That is correct." Or if they put one drop too much or too little of one of the ingredients, she would smell it and say, "That's a little too cinnamony. I think you messed up on the recipe." And they'd have to redo it again. So, that exists. That I remember working for a chef for a while in Dallas. I worked as I kind of was a placeholder when I was married. My wife actually worked there, and then whenever we got pregnant, she couldn't wait anymore. So she was going to lose her spot. So I said, "Well, I'll step in and I'll fill in for you," because I've been hearing all these stories. This guy's name, man, it escapes me. I can't think of his name at the moment, but Brown. I want to say his last name was Brown. Anyway, he was like the top chef in Dallas, and he only threw parties for the very, very wealthy. And so she'd come back with all these tales of meeting all these celebrities and being in the biggest mansions in Dallas. And so whenever she got pregnant and she was going to lose her spot, I stepped in and I said, "Well, I don't want you to lose your spot. Will they take me in your place until, the baby's here? And then if you want to go back, you can." And so she asked them, and they were okay with that. So I started working for her, and it was amazing to watch this chef because I never worked in an environment like that. And he would sample things here and there. And I watch a lot of the cooking shows. I was inspired to after working for him. And it's crazy to me that sometimes these chefs can say like, "Oh, there's too much salt, there's not enough salt," or some little nuanced little thing that happened like 10 steps ago in the preparation process, but they can tell a difference. And that actually is true. There is actual truth to that. It's not just for television that they do that. So anyways, let's see. Is it true that people who lose or are born without a sense often gain greater sensitivity in other senses? What do you think? Somebody that's born blind, do they have a better sense of hearing than most? What about somebody that's born deaf? Is their vision slightly better? Do they have x-ray vision? No, they don't have x-ray vision, but there is some truth to the fact that whenever you lose one sense, your other ones are slightly better. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it, because we're always, our cognitive processes are always competing for our full attention, right? So I'm talking right now and you're hearing me, right? You're also maybe watching me, so you have those two senses going. There are tactile things happening wherever you are. You're sitting somewhere or you're standing somewhere. Maybe you feel the wind on your skin, your clothes on your skin, your butt on the seat. So there's all of your senses are at play right now. And it doesn't really matter tactilely what is going on right now. It doesn't really matter if there's an apple pie being baked downstairs. Right? And that's not really pertinent to this lecture, right? But you're still competing with that, right? You're trying to focus on what I'm saying because that's what's important. Less so what you see, unless you're reading this, because this ugly guy is not really helping you. So really what is important right now is your auditory focus. But all of the other four senses are bombarding you with kind of not relevant information, and your brain is having to kind of play defense, and I don't care about that right now. Right? So imagine if you had one less of those to deal with, right? Your brain is going to be able to focus just a little bit better on that one that's important, or maybe two that are important. So there is a little bit of truth to that. All right, this works better in a classroom, especially whenever they're popping up one at a time. So I'm just going to go through it a little quickly. What do you think the difference is between these two words? Do you notice a difference? Most people can pretty readily tell that the word test on top is one font bigger than the word test on bottom. So this is a visual test, and we can see that this one's a little bit bigger. So this probably meets that threshold of change. It's roughly 2% difference, and plus they're right next to each other. Now that makes a big difference as well. What if I put this word test here and the other word test way over here? And I said, "Hey, can you proofread this document for me?" Do Do you think you would look at that and instantly go, oh yeah, this is the wrong font? You probably wouldn't notice that, right? Because it's far enough away that by the time you see this and move your eyes over to see this, it's roughly the same. So there is a little bit of play when we talk about that proportional difference between two things. I mean, how close in proximity are they to one another? And this is some of the stuff that there's a branch of psychology named Gestaltists, and that's this right here. We're going to get to that in a little bit. That is a little bit has to do with that. So we're gonna come back to this point in a few minutes. So this sentence is the color red. This sentence is the color red. Any difference between those two things? Well, depending on if you're watching this on your phone or if you're got it on your computer, this might be kind of small. If you when you get the PowerPoint, if you maximize and make it big, you'll notice that I went in here, and somewhere in here in the settings under color, you can go to this color wheel and you can kind of change just by the pixel, like a slightly different hue of red. And that's what I basically did. So I highlighted one of them and I went to that color wheel and I moved over just a few pixels. So this is actually a slightly different hue of red, right? Hue is the amount of redness in a color or blueness in a color. So there's a little bit of difference. What about these two yellow boxes? You might notice this one's a little bit brighter. So these are all visual tests, right? This is size, this one's a little bit bigger. This one's color, talking about hue, and this is talking about brightness. So there's differences. Maybe you saw them, maybe you didn't see them. What about this? Do you see any difference here between these two pictures? No? This is the exact same pedophile. No, I'm just kidding. So, all right, let's go. Keep going here. Where are we at? Number 7. All right, let's talk about transduction and adaptation. So there's sensory receptors, which are highly specialized cells in the sense organs that detect and respond to one type of sensory stimulus. So, in other words, you have particular kinds of sensory receptors for each of those senses, right? So you have auditory receptors, you have tactile receptors, you have olfactory, which is smell receptors. They're all highly individualized, all right? So we don't have olfactory sensors in our ears, right? We don't have tactile sensors in our brain for sound. It doesn't really work like that, right? So light, sound, odor, for example, and they transduce or convert the stimulus into neural impulses. So basically, this is kind of like the transduction process is when the sensory receptors convert sensory stimulation into neural impulses. So what happens is we see something, right? So light bounces off of that object and it goes into our eye. It is read by our retina. Our retina then it transduces that message and it sends it into our brain a neural impulse of what it is that we saw. That neural impulse is then decoded by the cognitive process of basically just understanding what it is. I don't know really if there's a name for that part, but just other than cognitive process. So transduction is the process through which sensory receptors convert the sensory stimulation into neural impulses. So I'm not a fan of tricks on tests specifically. This chapter is called sensation and perception. They happen in that order, right? You have to sense something, and then that sensory input is transduced. There's kind of the middleman, and then there is a perception, all right? So I think there's a test question like that, in which order does it happen? We have to sense it first. That sensory stimulation is then transduced into neural impulses, which are then perceived through cognitive processes, okay? So make sure you understand that is kind of the order of operations there. Sensory adaptation is a process in which sensory receptors grow accustomed to constant, unchanging levels of stimuli over time. So adaptation is like anything, right? If you're in a sound sleep and I turned the TV on and it was blaring, it would likely wake you up, right? What if you fall asleep with the TV blaring? How come you can sleep through there? The reason is sensory adaptation. Your senses are hearing that, you fall asleep because you're that tired, and the sound is not waking you up because you have already become adapted to it, right? It's sort of habituated. Um, Now the reverse is true. If you're used to silence and I break that silence, then you will wake up, right? So sensory adaptation has to do with your sensory receptors growing accustomed to something that's constant. So I talked about sleep deprivation a little bit, right? If I threw cold water on you, you undoubtedly you would wake up, right? But if I was throwing cold water on you like a lot, like super frequently, guess what? You could become habituated to that as well. And your sensory adaptation would kick in, and it would basically, the cognitive part of your brain would say, yeah, that's not important. I don't need to wake up for that. And you would sleep right through it. Buckets of water, doesn't matter. That's how people can fall asleep when they're chained up and standing, because your body will sense the pain of whenever you've got your hands up and then you're coming down with all of your weight on your wrists. It hurts, right? Cuts into you. It can dislocate your wrist easily. And there's pain involved there, right? Well, we're kind of wired to not sleep through pain, right? We want to self-preserve. Is that right? That's not right. Self-preserverance. I told you I just woke up. Anyways, so yeah, we're tuned to wake it up for that. But in this case, our body's like, hey, you know what? It's just going to hurt. I mean, this is just our lot in life right now. So it is what it is. And we could probably sleep through that pain as well. So I know I keep going back to that, but God, if you saw the things that I saw, it's just amazing what people can sleep through. All right, let's talk about vision just a little bit. So this is the movie version. This is the Marvel version. No, I'm just kidding. Not that vision. We're going to talk about actual vision. All right. So this is the visible spectrum of light right here. This little spot, right? So we have gamma rays. That's the Hulk, by the way. We have X-rays. That's Superman, by the way. We can't see these. And somebody said in one of my classes one time, oh my God, somebody rose their hand and said, you can see X-rays? And I was like, I'm sorry? Am I missing something? It's like, yeah, I broke my leg one time and I got an X-ray of it and I could see it. Yeah, you can see the printout on the photograph of X-rays, but you can't see actual X-rays in the air. Okay, so that's what I mean. So you can't see gamma rays, can't see X-rays, you can't see ultraviolet rays. Don't tell me that you can see under UV lights because they're purple or whatever. Don't even tell me that. Then there's infrared, then there's microwaves, and there's radio waves. We can't see any of those. This is what we can see. The narrow band of light waves that are visible to the human eye. And this is basically what it looks like. This is based on the length of the wave that's being produced. So shorter wavelengths tend to be bluish and purple. Kind of mid-level wavelengths are kind of your greens. And then red is a longer wavelength. Interestingly, if you've ever noticed in like special forces movies or whatever, sometimes if they're doing a night operation in the helicopter, they'll always have red light. The reason that they have red light is because any light that's around this area allows you to see in the dark, right? It's light enough that you can, look at a map or you can, check your equipment or whatever you need to do. But it's still dark enough that it doesn't open the pupil of your eye. So if we just had a regular light on, or say like a green light that was on, and then they shut the light off, they open the helicopter, and you rush out, now your eyes have to adjust, right? You have no night vision adjusted yet, and it takes several minutes. And in that sort of a situation, minutes could be life or death. So you don't want that. So they have red light, if there's any light at all. They'll have red light so that you can still see, and again, check your equipment, see each other, do whatever you need to do. And then as soon as you're out into the darkness, your pupils don't have to dilate or get used to night vision. They're already sort of that way. So also, I noticed one time at the zoo, they have bats in the enclosure, and they were all highlighted with red. And there was this kid who was like, yeah, that's because they're vampire bats and the blood. And That's cool. That's a good theory, and I'm not going to correct a little kid that's excited like that. But no, it's because we want to be able to see them, but we want the knights to think that it's nocturnal, so that they are active, so they're not just asleep all day long, which is what happens when you go to the zoo. Every animal's always asleep. All right, the eye. You're welcome for this picture, by the way. Take a good gander at that. I have no idea if that's real or fake or whatever, but it's kind of awesome. So there it is. All right, couple of nomenclature pieces here. So the lens is the transparent disc-shaped structure behind the iris and the pupil that changes shape as it is focusing on objects at various distances. So, you ever notice whenever you're trying to see something far away, what do? You go like this. You squint, right? What do you do whenever you bring something close and it's too close and you can't see it? What do? We kind of open our eyes real big, right? So that opening and closing of our eyes, what we're doing is we're flexing the muscles in our eyes specifically for the lens. The lens it looks, and I'm just going to be crass, it looks like, if you've ever seen what a fake boob looks like, just that silicone jelly water balloon looking thing, that's basically exactly what your lens looks like. It looks like a big, like, fake boob in your eyeball. So it's when you squeeze on it, right? You're changing the thickness. So when you flex those muscles in your eye, and there's like four of them, four or six, I can't remember. You're manipulating that in different ways, and it's no different than a photographer who is turning the telephoto lens, right? And that's what brings it into focus. That's the same thing that you're doing manually. You're squishing that so that the light that's passing through that lens is hitting the retina at a different place. So it's bringing it into focus. Now, why is it that whenever we turn around 40-ish, we suddenly, all of a sudden, we need glasses? Well, like anything else, age causes elasticity of muscles. That's why whenever you're young, everything's tight and whatever, and then when you get older, you have like the looser skin, and you got the pains in your elbows and knees, and you got all that old people stuff going on, right? Well, that's because the muscles that are allowing the contractions to shape this lens elongate. They become more elastic, like your favorite pair of underwear, and it just doesn't stay on anymore, because that elastic just gives out over time, and you're not able to focus as much because you can't manipulate the lens as much as you used to be able to. By the way, get LASIK whenever you get to that point. It's the best thing I've ever done. I wore glasses for a couple of years, and I absolutely hated wearing glasses. They do make you look smart, though. There's truth to that. I look like a dumb guy. All right, accommodation. Accommodation is the flattening. That's what I was talking about. Flattening and bulging action of the lens as it focuses. Let's see, I already talked about that. Retina is the layer of tissue that is located on the inner surface of the eyeball and contains the sensory receptors for vision. So the retina is our sensory receptor for vision. All right, rods and cones. Rods are the light-sensitive receptor cells in the retina that look like slender cylinders and allow the eye to respond to as few as 5 photons of light. Cones are also light-sensitive receptor cells in the retina, but they have a different function. These enable humans to see color and find details in adequate light, but do not function very well in dim light. So this one is good for night vision, and this one is really good for color. That's really the difference. Now, how do you remember which one's which? Because I always got them confused. I would think of whenever I was a cop and I used to work the night shift, and I carried a long mag light, flashlight, right? It's a long rod-looking thing that allows me to see at night. Rods allow you to see at night. A cone, I think of, ice cream cones at like Baskin Robbins or Marble Slab or whatever. You can get every different color of ice cream imaginable. So cones deal with colors and rods deal with light. That's how I remember those. All right. A couple of questions here. Philosophically, we would have a class discussion about this. Do we all see red the same way? For instance, Captain America's shield right here, right? I see red. Does that look like red to you? Or maybe when I'm saying red, you're actually seeing this color, but you have always seen this color and called it red. So there's a whole philosophical debate. Do we all see the same color? and call it the same thing? Well, the answer is that's a dumb argument. Yes, we all see red as red, and it has to do with the light waves that bounce off of that object and the speed at which those light waves are read by the neural impulses, and that is how we are able to detect it and ascertain a color by hue and saturation and brightness. It has to do with the neural impulses, the kind of the ones and zeros, if you will, that our brain is reading off of that light coming in. And that essentially is, you can measure that. You can measure the light wave coming off of, say, bouncing off of this color right here. It can be measured. And I'm perceiving the same measurement as you're perceiving, so why would I see that as any other color? So this is where we get into the conversation about the dress. Remember that big internet meme thing that was going around for a while? That is that dress. What was it? Gold and white or blue and green or something like that. I mean, the colors weren't even remotely the same. And some people saw this color and some people saw this color. And again, if I did more research, I would have that picture up right here, but I don't. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, Google it. And if you do know what I'm talking about, what was up with that? How come people are seeing different colors, completely different colors? I saw gold. I don't know how anybody saw anything else. It has to do a little bit with this, and that's where this argument comes into play. Do we all see the same colors as everyone else? Well, that test shows, clearly no, we don't. Some people saw blue, some people saw gold, right? So maybe there is a slight argument there after all. But by and large, I haven't really done a ton of research on this, and I don't really see it being much of an argument. Those kind of things are just more like optical illusions kind of thing, and we're going to talk about those here in a second. All right. There are a couple of different theories of this, and I think they're interesting, and I'm just going to shoot straight with you. I haven't done looking this up in quite a while, so I'm not going to, I don't think there's anything on the test about this, but it is kind of interesting, honestly, and if I wasn't kind of overworked right now, I probably would have spent a little bit more time and freshened up my memory on this, but the trichromatic theory of color vision suggests that there's 3 types of cones in the retina that each make a maximal chemical response to one of 3 basic colors: blue, green, and red. So in other words, there's the cones that I mentioned earlier, right? But there's not like a cone for every color or every shade of every color, right? There's only those 3, blue, green, and red. And each of them are either triggered or they're not triggered. And if they're triggered, then they release a chemical response, right? Remember that neural impulse that I was talking about? Well, that's what neural impulses are. They're basically electrochemical responses, right? They are electric, right? We can measure that, but the electric that action potential that's sent down the axon that I mentioned before, that is basically started and stopped through chemical processes. That's what triggers the electrical process. So it's an electrochemical response, not to get too confusing about all that stuff. But so it's either activated or it's inhibited, basically. So that is why if you look at a particular color, actually that's this next theory, the after image. So if you ever looked at one of those things where it's like, it'll be like a little dot and you stare at the dot and it's like really close too, right? So it's usually like past your focal point. So it's not in focus very well. And you just leave your eyes open and you stare for like 60 seconds. And then you come back and you pull the picture into focus and the color looks like it'll be a negative, like a photographic negative, like for print. But then whenever you come back, the colors reverse, and now it's no longer negative. It's the opposite of what it was. This is the after image effect. These two are very, very similar, and I get components of them mixed up. So again, I'm not as well versed in this as I used to be. But the second one suggests that 3 types of cells respond by increasing or decreasing the rate of fire when different colors are present. So just like this one, blue, green, and red, they're either inhibited or activated, but they can only keep that up for a certain amount of time. And so that's the point of that stare at this dot for 60 seconds, right? You're firing, 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 firing until you got nothing left to fire, right? I mean, just like anything else that fires, you got to reload. So when you're firing and then all that, you've expended all the energy that you can in those cells, they don't have anything left to fire. When you come back, then their antithesis happens, right? The ones that were firing are now resting. The ones that have been resting are now firing. That's why you get a reverse image. So that's this after image effect. So there's some interesting studies and things that you can do. Like you can read the study and then do like a little sample experiment on your own and kind of see what they're talking about. So it's kind of cool. But this isn't something that really translates easily online. So yeah, we're kind of skipping that. So again, if you're kind of into this field and this is your thing, you might want to Google a little bit of this and look at it just because it's interesting. But as far as our purposes, we're done with this. All right, hearing. Again, we're going to fly through this. We're not going to cover this in super nuanced detail. Sound requires a medium through which to travel, air, water, or solid. Obviously, sound travels through air. Obviously, sound travels underwater, right? That's why sonars are what they are. So if you're on one submarine and you're talking, the sound that is coming out of your voice, right? Your voice, what am I trying to say? The wavelengths that you are creating with your vocal cords that are coming out of your voice are traveling through the air until they hit what? The wall on the side of the submarine, which is then what? A solid. It can actually travel through that and then travel through water hundreds of yards, and a sonar operator on another submarine can hear conversations on a submarine. It's amazing to me that we have that technology, right? Now, granted, they can't like hear it like you're standing right next to them, right? It's a little different than that, but they can hear that there are sounds. That's why whenever they go all quiet and on a submarine, you have like everybody has to be quiet. Like even whispering is frowned upon. Because any sound is potentially detectable through this sophisticated equipment. One of the things, while I was on a task force for a little while in the FBI building in Dallas, and they had a bunch of construction going on. I said, "What are they doing?" And they said, they're putting vibrators on the window," which to an immature cop, I mean, we're going to laugh. We're like, vibrators? Right? We're all laughing at that. And they said, "Nah, they have microphones now that are laser microphones." I was like, "What? I don't know. What does that mean?" You can take a laser microphone, right, and you can shoot a laser beam for, I don't even know, several miles, apparently, and hit a window, and it can detect the vibrations from the sound coming on the inside, and it can, and then travel back up the laser. And it's like holding a microphone right there in the room. So they had to put vibrators on the windows, so they're constantly bzzz, and you can't hear it when you're in the room. You hear like a very low hum kind of thing, but it disrupts the laser microphones. So I thought that was pretty cool. All right, so frequency is the number of cycles completed by a sound wave in 1 second, determining the pitch of the sound, which is expressed in hertz. So this is your sound wave, right? Here's your 1 second duration. If it's somewhat long sound wave, then you're going to hear a lower tone. If you hear if it's a very, very fast wavelength, right? We're going to get several wavelengths here in 1 second, then it's going to be a higher pitch like a whistle. So again, this is the sensory receptors in your ears, your auditory sensory receptors, that are able to sort of decode the number of wavelengths per second type thing, and that's what cognitively you process as what you're hearing. Amplitude and timbre just more distinguishes different sounds. We're not going to get into that. Decibels is how loudness something is. Timbre is the distinct quality that distinguishes it from other of the same pitch and loudness. So two people that talk that have they sound different. I mean, why does Morgan Freeman sound like Morgan Freeman, and why does James Earl Jones sound like Darth Vader? Well, because he is Darth Vader. But why does he sound like that? Well, he has a specific timbre to his voice, right? The specific quality of his voice is apparently pleasant to listen to. All right, so here's the ear. I'm going to make this bigger, so we can kind of break this down just a little bit. So this is your outer ear, obviously, right? Here's your auditory canal. This is your tympanic membrane, which is also known as your eardrum. And when sound comes in, it hits this eardrum, which vibrates it, right? Which moves these, right? This is your malleus, your incus, and your stapes. These are the three smallest bones in your body, by the way. And it looks right here at this elliptical window, right? That's part of your, what is that, cochlea? I don't know how to say that right. I think that's right. So this is the mechanism through which you're able to hear, right? Here's your auditory nerve. This is kind of the plug that's plugged into this mechanics that's going on here. So the mechanic thing is vibrating, and it's doing its thing, and it's being converted, right? Transduced, and then that transduced message comes to your auditory nerve into your brain to be decoded. Now this is the basically your cavity. Don't worry about that. This is the tube that goes to your sinuses. So whenever your sinuses get kind of congested, right, you get fluid that backs up in here, and it puts pressure on here, and that's why your ears get clogged up. You can't hear as well because this is not able to vibrate as well. What I want to talk about are these three semicircular canals. So look at how these are shaped. All right, so we're going to see this person is standing, right? So we have this semicircular canal that's up and down, right? So this would be vertical. Then we have this one over here that's horizontal. And then we have this weird one that's like at a 45-degree angle almost. Why do you think we have those? This has to do with your, look at this, your vestibular nerve comes into this. This is how we orient balance. But you didn't think that, right? Your balance is actually controlled by your inner ear. And people that get something called vertigo, where they just get dizzy all of a sudden, right? There is some sort of short circuit going on right here between the mechanical communication here and the neural impulse being transduced to the vestibular nerve. Something is awry. There is a short circuit here. There is some bad connection to where they're getting input from this that doesn't make a lot of sense here. Because what happens are these are filled with fluid and gravity pulls things down, right? So if these are all filled with fluid, this one is going to be completely full. This 45-degree one is going to be completely full. This one's going to come right up here to the top, but this little area right here is going to have basically like kind of an air bubble, right? Not necessarily any fluid in that. Now, if I was laying on my side, it would be the opposite. This one would be completely full. This one probably completely full. This one would have the little air bubble here. So what is happening here is this is sort of the gyroscope, right? That you can tell where the air bubble is based on how your head is tilted. And, you know, your head's connected to your body. So how your head is tilted is also how is basically how you're able to tell how you're oriented in time and space, right? So this is your sense of balance through your inner ear. And again, sometimes you feel dizzy whenever you feel, when you have a really bad sinus congestion, you stand up and you're a little woozy for a second. Again, this is a little bit haywire because there's so much pressure and sinus buildup that this is just not operating at max capacity. So, balance. This chick doesn't have it, obviously. What a great look on this girl's face, too, right? I really want to know what the aftermath of this picture is. It's kind of hilarious. All right, balance and movement. I just talked about all this. So we have the kinesthetic sense, the sense of providing information about the position and movement of body parts. Your vestibular sense is the sense that provides information about the body's orientation in space. And then the three semicircular canals I just talked about. All right, skipping that. Olfaction is your sense of smell. Your olfactory epithelium. I think you will see that on the test just because I think it's a cool word. Olfactory epithelium sounds like something you learned in college. So I like putting that on the test. It's not something you'll ever use in everyday life. Maybe you can throw it out at a party, be the life of the party. I don't know. But it's two 1 square inch patches of tissue, one at the top of each nasal cavity, which together contain about 10 million olfactory neurons, which are the receptors for smell. What scientist do you think counted those? Do you think there was some scientist that was like, all right, I'm gonna be famous for this. 1, 2, 3, 4, and got all the way to 10 million? I always wonder that kind of thing. All right, your olfactory bulbs, two matchstick-sized structures above the nasal cavities where smell sensations first register in the brain. Now, notice that this is the nasal cavity, right? Right back in here, very much tied in with our sense of taste. Sense of smell, sense of taste, very intertwined, which we'll come back to. All right, gustation is the sense of taste. So these are words you might not have heard before. I mean, we just say, how does something smell? And we say, taste, all that kind of stuff. Gustation is for taste. Olfaction is for smell. You might want to remember those. This is connected, as I said, in the nasal cavity. That's why if you hold your nose, if you're going to take like bad tasting medicine, you can hold your nose and take the medicine and you will never taste it. Now, people say, oh, I tried that, it didn't work. Well, that's because you did it wrong. So here's what people do. They'll go to eat a bite of something gross like broccoli. Don't get me wrong, I wish I liked broccoli because it is like a superfood and it's full of protein and all kinds of good stuff. I cannot make myself like broccoli. I don't like it raw with ranch. I don't like it hot with cheese. I don't like it at all. It's just disgusting. So let's say I have to eat a piece of broccoli, all right? So what people do is they stab it, they bring it up to their face, they plug their nose, they take a bite, and then a lot of times they let go of their nose while they're chewing it up. Well, duh, okay? Look, once the smell is in there, those neural impulses are shooting off to the brain saying, it smells like broccoli. Your gustation is then tied to that and you taste broccoli, all right? So the way to make this work is you have to plug your nose before you smell it, okay? While it's still way over here with the lid on. Plug your nose completely. Put it in your mouth. Chew. Swallow. Now if you let go, guess what? You're going to taste it. Why? Because you still have remnants of it in your mouth. You can still smell what's in your own mouth, believe it or not. So you're probably going to taste it. So plug your nose before you smell it. Eat it. Chew. Swallow it. Then take a drink. Wash it out of your mouth completely. Let go of your nose. Likely you won't have tasted anything. All right, there's your how to eat broccoli. All right, taste buds are structures along the sides of the tongue's papillae that are composed of 60 to 100 receptor cells for taste. There are 5 distinct tastes. There is sweet, sour, salty, bitter. Okay, there's the 4. Now this last one is got a couple of different names. It's called monosodium glutamate, which is MSG. It's also called umami. It's also called savory. Now, I guess it just depends on if you're talking to a chef or a scientist, because if you're talking to a chef, undoubtedly, you're in culinary school, you are going to learn savory. Savory is a meat-like flavor, that hearty meat flavor, right? Umami is a Japanese word for that, and monosodium glutamate is what makes it taste that way. So if you're talking to a scientist, they're probably going to say MSG because it sounds sciencey, right? I call it savory, right? Sweet and savory, sweet and salty. Sometimes you mix these things together. Good chefs learn the proper proportions of all of these things. Believe it or not, a lot of sweets have salt in them. The saltiness brings out the sweetness to some extent. Now, of course, you can overdo that. You know those little fancy cakes? I think they're made by Little Debbie? The little, like, zebra cakes or whatever? I never have really liked those, and I'm a huge cupcake, cake, sweets guy. Um, and my mom, I said something I didn't like them to my mom one time. She goes, "Yeah, they're too salty," and I was like, "Salty? What are you talking about? They're like cupcakes. They're not salty. They're sugary. I just don't like the way they taste for some reason." The next time I ate one, I'll be damned. That's what I don't like about them. They're too salty. And because the proportion of sweet and salty, I think they just went a little heavy-handed on the salt, and they did that to not to make it sweet and salty. They did that to bring out the sweetness, and for my tastes, it's just a little too much. So I don't taste the sweetness. I just taste the salty, and yeah, I don't care for them. So yeah, this is interesting. If you go to culinary school, you learn about, you have to know tons of each of these foods. Tons of things that are just naturally sweet, like beets, for instance, are very, very sweet naturally. And then, of course, sour, and that has to do with the acidity. Saltiness, bitterness, same thing, the acidity. So you mix in a little bit of the acidity with whatever your dish is, and that brings out other flavors if you do it in the right proportions. So anyway, for those of you that are cooks. All right, now we're moving on to touch, which is tactile, right? Your sense of touch. Now, this is maybe my favorite story in all of my college teaching career, right? Because this is, I swear to God, a true story. I had this student at Lone Star a couple semesters ago, and I didn't love this kid, right? I didn't hate him, but he wasn't my favorite. And most of the reason he wasn't my favorite is because I'd get to the campus and he would be sitting in his car blaring crappy rap music as loud as he could. And I just don't like people that do that. I'm like, no sense of, anybody other than themselves. Either you're showing off, which just reeks of insecurity and you're an idiot, or you're not showing off, you just like music that loud, which you're an idiot. And you're listening to that crap, which you're an idiot. I just didn't like anything about it, right? The situation. And he sat in class. He looked bored all the time. I just, whatever. My life is going to go on, and I'm not going to miss this kid after the semester. Right? That's how I felt. So, anyway, I always start off Mondays, and I'm like, "Hey, anybody got any good stories from the weekend?" As I'm getting the computer set up and everything, just making small talk. And I'm like, "Anybody, get in a fight, go to jail, any cool stories, anything like that?" And very few times does anybody ever have anything other than I went and saw a movie, something like that, right? So this kid raises his hand, and I was like, "Wow, that's interesting, right?" He's not a talker, so I thought that. He goes, "Yeah." Now pause that. Let me tell you this gate control theory of pain. All right, so the gate control theory of pain. There's an area of the spinal cord that acts as a gate, and it can only send a certain amount of neural messages at a time to the brain for processing. Basically, they get kind of bottlenecked, right? It's like a one exit in a huge building and a fire happens, and everybody needs to get out, right? Only so many people are going to get out at a time, right? So this gate control theory of pain says that we can manipulate this amount by certain actions. In other words, it's like a dam. Right? We can open up a dam to control the flood of the river, right? So this is the same thing. So we have multiple exits, and sure, everybody's going to go to one, but if we don't want that, we can open a couple more exits, and now we're going to get people coming here. There's going to be less congestion at this one because we have multiple exits, okay? So the way this works is, let's say somebody comes up, boom, punches you in the arm. They hit you in the arm, and it hurts, right? What do you do other than, retaliate, hit them back and whatever? But what do you do? We hold it, right? And we rub it. Why does rubbing it make it feel better? If you got hit in it, if I have a bruise, I don't sit there and massage a bruise. That hurts, right? So why, when you get hit and it hurts and it likely will become a bruise, why does rubbing it at that time make it feel better? Well, that's this gate control theory of pain. Because when we get hit, right, it activates those pain receptors, and it's sending off these neural messages to our brain, ow, 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 ow. Whenever I'm rubbing it, well, that feels good, right? it feels good to be rubbed. I don't care where you're getting rubbed. It just, it feels good, right? So I'm rubbing it. So now I'm sending pleasure impulses on top of the pain impulses. So my brain is now not just getting pain impulses, but getting a little bit of pleasure. So therefore, less pain. Does that make sense? So that's this gate control theory of pain. That is why we rub something whenever it hurts or whatever. Or have you ever had an older brother sometimes, like somebody will stub their toe and they're like, you know how bad that is, right? That's like god awful, world ending pain, right? To stub your toe really hard on something. And then they'll come up and punch you in the arm. And you're sitting there like, oh, it's the worst day ever. Why'd you do that? And they're like, your foot doesn't hurt anymore, does it? There's truth to that. There is some truth to that, right? Now my arm hurts and my foot still hurts, but less than it did before. And I'd almost rather divide that pain into two sites than have that overly intense pain in just my little toe, right? So that's the gate control theory of pain. I told that and I moved right along, whatever. Oh, the other thing, one more thing, endorphins. Endorphins is a neurotransmitter, remember we talked about those in the brain chapter, that acts as a pain blocker. Now there's different kinds of endorphins, right? Pain blocker released with, get this, exercise releases endorphins. You've heard of a runner's high. You hit that wall where you're like, but if you push through that, then you get those endorphins coming out and you feel kind of high. By the way, from a neurotransmitter molecular level, there is no difference between this kind of high and any other kind of high. High based on exercise, high based on marijuana, high based on MDMA, high based on sex, high based on laughing. It's all the same. It's all neurotransmitters and endorphins in our brain that make us feel good. Now, we might get slightly different amounts of these endorphins from these different activities, but endorphins are released from all of this different stuff. There's a show called House MD, one of my favorite shows I used to watch, and the guy's got some neurological problems in his leg, so it's always in pain. So he gets addicted to painkillers, but he's a doctor. So at some point, all of his doctor friends realize he's addicted, and nobody will write him a script for it anymore. So he doesn't have the Vicodin for his leg, and when there's a scene where he takes his hand and he takes a hammer and he smashes his hand with a hammer. And I thought he did it so that he would have a broken hand, and then he would be able to get a doctor to prescribe him painkillers for the injury. Turns out that's not what they were doing. They just didn't explain it. It was an endorphin rush because he caused himself a lot of pain by hitting his hand like that, which temporarily released those endorphins. He felt better, even if it was just for a moment, right? So that's endorphins. All right, so back to my story. So this kid raises his hand. You know, anybody have anything good this weekend? He goes, yeah. So I was like, I'm gonna do my impression of him. So like we was like hanging out with my cousin, and like he like just got out the army, and so he got like a little bit of like PTSD or whatever. So he sleeps with like a gun under his pillow. And he fell asleep, and we was all like drinking and stuff. And so we thought like we was gonna go in there and we was gonna like mess with him, right? We didn't know he had a gun. So like we go in there and we were gonna put some shaving cream on his hand and then like tickle his nose, so he puts it like this and smashes it in his face. So we go in there and they like started doing all that, and he woke up and got scared and he shot my cousin in the leg. I got a video right here. It's pretty cool. I was like, what? And so he shows us the video, and sure enough, I mean, they're, waiting to see this shaving cream in the face prank or whatever. And instead, they get cousin shot in the leg prank. But he goes, yeah, but it was really scary and stuff, like after he did it, because like he's like laying on the ground and like he was talking about how like bad his leg hurt and everything, like call an ambulance. And so we was like calling the ambulance, and he started like going like that and biting on his hand really hard. Like he started making his hand bleed and stuff because he was biting on his hand. This is the way the kid talked. This is like spot on, by the way. He's biting on his hand and stuff and like making it bleed. And then like my other cousin goes, yo, man, like he freaking out. Like, why he doing that? And I said, That's the gay can throw theory of pain, man. He doing that so his leg don't hurt so bad. And I was like, oh my God, I totally just got through to this kid. I'm sitting here thinking this kid is sleeping through every lecture and didn't really care if he did. And turns out he not only understood this gate control theory of pain, but he applied it in a real world situation while his cousin was sitting there with a gunshot wound to his leg. That's amazing. Moving on. That's a true story, by the way. Swear to God. All right, perception. Let's talk about this. I'm going to make this big again so we can see these. All right, let's talk about this. Is this 4 or is this 3? 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, right? Depends on how you see it, right? How do you perceive it? Do you perceive? Most people look at things from left to right, right? That's the way we're taught to read. But it's possible you just looked at it as a collective picture. Maybe you're going top to bottom, in which case this is a little higher. Maybe you did sort of start this way. So, once it's pointed out, you can kind of see it both ways. And if you follow the lines, you see that it's, it's two-dimensional drawing and it doesn't really make a lot of sense in 3 dimensions. So it's a little bit confusing to our brain. What about this one? I like this one. Is this guy looking straight at you or is he looking to this direction? To, I guess, that would be his right, our left. Now, you probably only saw this one way until I pointed that out. If you're looking at this straight on, right, this looks like his eyes looking right at you, his ears looking right at you, this mouth looks like it's looking right at you, but then his nose definitely looks like it's pointing to the left. So then you go back and look at it again. Well, now, doesn't it look like his eye is facing this way? A little bit? And his mouth, that could certainly, if you block the ear out, that could certainly be looking to the left. So basically, if you block out the ear, I think he was looking to the left. If you block out the nose, I think he's looking straight dead on. So a little bit of photoshopping, perhaps. I don't know. But, our perceptions are not always accurate because sometimes we get the neural impulse, right? We base the neural impulse on what we're seeing, and at the same time we're seeing that, we're reaching into our memory and we're dipping into what's called a schema, right? A blueprint of what we know a face looks like. And we take a quick glance and we're looking at a heuristic, which is a kind of a mental shortcut. Oh yeah, I know what a face looks like. So we do a quick heuristic glance at this and we perceive it some kind of way. And it's might be slightly different than what the picture is actually showing, right? What about this one right here? We see either a chalice, if we focus on the white, or a candle holder maybe, or if we're focused on the black, we see 2 faces looking at each other. Did you see both? Did you only see one when it was pointed out? And then we have this weird 4-footed, 3-footed, no leg thing here going on with this pachyderm. I'm going to call him a pachyderm instead of an elephant because it makes me feel smart. All right. We'll talk a little bit more about the perception stuff in just a second. Let me get through a couple more slides here. So attention is the process of sorting through sensations and selecting some for further processing. So we see things all the time that we just don't pay attention to. This is something that definitely can get better with training. It can get better depending on situations. Some people have an eye for detail. They are more attentive than others. They notice things that maybe other people don't notice. And again, it probably is a lot because of training. I feel like I'm a pretty detailed-oriented person, and I do pick up on little minor things pretty readily, but not always. Everybody has their days. Some days I'm distracted, like just now I was looking out the window because the neighbors across the street, I think they're building a deck in their backyard. I'm not sure what they're doing. I'm dying to find out because they've got all these carpenters and they're building all this wood and cutting and then they carry it around to the backyard and their house doesn't look any different. So they're building something back there. Maybe they're building like a koi pond or something, but they've been there for like a week. So yeah, I can't focus on this because in the corner of my eye, I'm seeing movement and I think it's somebody turning into my driveway and I turn to look and it's across the street. It's not in my driveway. So There's your example of attention. Now, inattentional blindness is failure to notice something that is completely visible because of a lack of attention to it. This is where that video, by the way, actually kind of fits in. I got a little excited and I included it already, but that's okay because it kind of pertains to multiple chapters. But this is that Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris video. This is that gorilla with the basketball, passing the basketball thing or whatever. Um, so the reason this picture's here is, I can drive home and I can ask you, did you notice that construction going on the southbound side of 45? Maybe you're going northbound, and you're like, no. Well, it's not that you didn't see it. I mean, how do you miss a big, long construction zone, right? But if you're traveling the opposite direction, that doesn't pertain to you. Maybe you're not going to be coming back that direction for a while, so you didn't even pay attention to it, right? Or if I said, hey, did you notice all of those, black SUVs? No. I mean, I'm just driving and there's a lot of traffic, so whatever. So you might not notice certain things because you simply aren't paying attention to them, and it's not a big deal. All right, something called cross-modal perception. This is a process by which the brain integrates information from more than one sense. So this is like whenever those old Chinese kung fu movies are dubbed into English and their lips are moving but their words don't match their lips. Oh my God, that bothered me so bad growing up because my dad used to watch all those like Sunday morning kung fu movies or whatever, and I didn't understand that. I didn't even understand. I was a dumb kid. I didn't even understand that it was a different language being dubbed. I just thought that was part of the movie for some reason. Like that was part of they learned martial arts and how to make their lips not match the words. Like that's what they do, I guess, over there. So, yeah. So this is something that babies are not very good at. So whenever like little babies, like 5-6 weeks old, you got a baby in their little seat, right? And a loud sound happens over there. You'll see them startle, and they just kind of look all around, right? When they get a little bit older, a loud sound happens. They might startle, and then they might look towards the sound, right? Because whenever they're young, they hear the sensory input of the sound, right? And the loudness of it usually startles, but that's it. They have no real concept because their brain is still sort of connecting and growing, right? When they get a little bit older, and this happens fairly young, then they start to have cross-modal perception where they can see it and they can get a sense that it came from that direction. And they can look over in that direction. So they're able to orient that sound. Again, this goes back to the kinesthetic and the vestibular, your orientation in time and space. So you know that it came from that direction. You heard it a little bit louder in this ear than in this ear, that kind of thing. That's cross-modal perception. All right. Real quick, bottom-up processing and then top-down processing. Bottom-up is whenever you take clues and you build them into a bigger picture. We're going to talk more about this in better detail in another chapter. So it's in this chapter. I'm just going to kind of skip it for now. So we'll come back to this. But I do like this slide. Top-down processing is whenever you take a picture and then you can break it down into like pieces. I'll give you a second to look at that. No, that's not real, by the way. But anyway, I thought it was funny. All right. I'm going to skip this as well. This is the mirror neuron system. It's kind of interesting, and I started to look into this a little bit, and then I never really got any further with it. I didn't find a lot of research about it, but there's something called mirror neurons that is a network of cells the brain uses to interpret and produce motor actions and emotion-related behavior. And there were some studies that came out that showed some correlations with autism. And what they were showing was that people that are higher on the spectrum for autism tend to not have very good mirror neurons. In other words, that emotional related behavior and that ability to like read facial cues, their brain literally doesn't have that. So they have kind of a physical, I don't want to say it's proof, but it's correlated with kind of what's going on symptomatically with autism and some neuro mumbo jumbo. But I'm not really going to get into it. I didn't again. I found one or two studies that were kind of interesting, and then a lot of times when you do a study, everybody jumps on that bandwagon and they're replicating it or they're building on that research. I didn't see that happen. I saw a few people did this research, and then I didn't hear anything else mentioned for like 6 months. So I'm not really sure where they're going with that, but I thought it was kind of interesting. Here's a term that you'll hear me use if I haven't already: cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a mental conflict that occurs when beliefs or assumptions are contradicted by new information. So you think you know something, and then you get new information, and it contradicts what you think you know. And now you have a dissonance. Now you're like, well, is the new information false, or is the old information false? Is the old information used to be true, but now it's no longer true because it's been replaced by the new? So I don't know what to do with that. This was coined by a guy named Fessinger in 1956, and I very much like this term, cognitive dissonance. So there are times when I saw this guy at work the other day, and he's an unloader. All he does is unload trucks, and I have seen this guy. I mean, his whole job is to take boxes out of a truck and put them on a pallet. And there's like 5 rules. If it weighs a certain amount of money, he puts a sticker on it that says mechanical lift only. If it's if it's a certain weight collectively, then like the pallet itself can't weigh more than 1,600 pounds. Then it has to be stored in bulk on the floor. Anything 1,600 pounds or below, we can store it on racks up on the shelves. I mean, there's a few rules, right? And I have seen this knucklehead take 4-foot boxes and put them on 6-foot pallets because no idea why. Well, 4-foot pallets go in one area and 6-foot pallets go in another area because the shelves are bigger and smaller. You don't put a 6-foot pallet on a 4-foot shelf, it doesn't fit, and a 4-foot pallet on a 6-foot shelf is a little bit of a safety concern because it's hard to get with a forklift. So it's pretty much not rocket science, right? So I see this guy that does these dumb things, and you get a perception, right? You're like, this is not an intelligent man. And that's okay. Everybody's got their strengths and weaknesses, and intelligence is just not his strength. And I'm not saying that he's a bad person or anything like that. I have lunch with him all the time. But I don't hold him in high regard intellectually because of, what he's chosen to do for a job and the fact that he doesn't even do that particularly well. And we went to lunch and we had a conversation, and I'll be damned if he didn't have some pretty freaking smart ideas. I mean, he's a lot sharper than I gave him credit for. And so I had a lot of cognitive dissonance. Like, God, is this guy an idiot? Or is he like so smart that he's kind of flipped all the way back around on the spectrum to being kind of dumb sometimes again? I don't really know what to make of this dude now. So anyways, you'll hear me kind of reference that term before again. All right, Gestalt, moving along. Gestalt psychology was kind of a movement in psychology. So we had, structuralism and functionalism and behaviorism and psychoanalysis. Well, Gestaltism was kind of a movement that came and went. It was a here today, gone tomorrow in the history of psychology. But they looked at a lot of sensation and perception stuff. So if you look at like the history of psychology and more depth than what we went into for this class, right? Sensation and perception was a huge component early on because it was really some of the first time that had really been studied. And so it felt nicely into a new field of study, new field of science, right? Psychology, it just felt like a good match. So Gestaltists looked at some of this stuff, and I found this graphic online that I really liked because this sums up a lot of the things that they really focus a lot of attention on in one graphic. So they looked at things like closure. So this, I think, undoubtedly we would all agree is the letter G, right? However, that being said, does anybody make their G like this? With this space right here and this space right here? No. Nobody watching this makes their G's like this. But our brain is so familiar with this letter G. And plus, we see it in collection with this whole word, and we know it's Gestalt. So we know that it's probably a G. Our brain is able to just flat out ignore. It just fills in this gap as if it doesn't even exist, right? So that is, if you really think about it, that's kind of amazing because this could be a letter, this could be a letter, and this could be a letter. If I showed this to somebody that was from China, where they have dramatically different letters than what we have, they would have no idea what this was. And they might say this is 3 different letters because their brain's not going to close in that gap. It doesn't have the familiarity there. So, that is kind of an interesting concept. Now, this proximity, I mentioned this earlier with those 2 words test that were in close proximity. Our objects that are close together will be grouped together visually. So, in this case, we have a bunch of little dots that form the letter E. And if I said, what is this? You would say, it's the letter E. You wouldn't say it's a bunch of dots. You would automatically say, this is the letter E. And if I said, what's it made of? You might say dots. But very few people would say, it's a bunch of dots, and it looks like it's in the shape of an E. Most people wouldn't say that. They would say it's the letter, because it's the most common letter in the English alphabet. All right, this is my favorite one. Something called continuation. What is happening with this gray, like popsicle stick, and this letter S? What is going on? If I asked you to describe to me what you're seeing, what would you say? Most people in almost every class says, the popsicle stick is like kind of interweaving. It's going like over the top and then under the middle and then over the bottom. And that's exactly what it looks like, right? You would not be wrong to say that that's what it looks like. However, let's talk about over and under in the shape of a 2-dimensional versus 3-dimensional picture. So 2 dimensions is height and width, right? When we say it's a 2-dimensional photo, that's what this is. 3rd dimension is height, width, and it adds depth. This is not 3-dimensional. It does not have depth. You can run your finger on the screen and you won't feel any bumps or lines. There is no depth at all. So it is impossible for this to go on top of the S and on the underneath the fat part of the S and then on top. It's impossible. It is a 2-dimensional picture and you are describing what's going on in 3 dimensions which don't exist here. So that's kind of fascinating. And the reason that happens so naturally is because our brain exists in a 3-dimensional world. We look around and we see things and there is a depth to them. And we get used to seeing that. So we are much more used to seeing 3 dimensions than 2 dimensions. So when we see these different colors, right, and we see that it stops abruptly here, starts abruptly here, and then the same thing with the S. It stops abruptly here, starts abruptly back on the other side of the gray. Our brain is able to process that in 3 dimensions, even though this is not, and tell us what's going on is this is going above this, below here, and above this. And none of that's really actually happening. So that's pretty fascinating to me. This is a concept that they looked at. Something called similarity. 2 items that share attributes will be visually grouped together. So the 2 T's will be shown to be the same. If I were to take a little chunk of this bottom part of the T off or whatever, you probably wouldn't notice it as differentiated from this one because you just see 2 T's. You don't even notice that one's a little bit different than the other. And then figure and ground, this is kind of like that chalice that I showed you with the 2 faces. If you're focused on the forefront if you're focused on the background, it kind of changes your perception a little bit. So this is kind of in a nutshell a lot of what Gestaltism was about. It was about sensations visually being perceived and kind of how our brain messes those up sometimes. All right, a couple more perception things. An illusion is a false perception or a misperception of an actual stimulus. So sometimes like whenever you, on a really, really hot day and you look up ahead and you see what looks like water on the road, that's an illusion. That's kind of a mirage is another word. So the reason that you see that is because the heat, you're seeing light waves that come down, then they hit the ground and then they bounce back up, and the heat from the asphalt is causing those light waves to bend at a different rate as they're coming down. So it causes a waviness, which our mind perceives as that kind of water on the road effect. This is a Mueller-Lyer illusion. Which horizontal line is longer? Most people will say this bottom one is a little bit longer. And if you put like any kind of ruler, actually I could probably use me as a ruler. I put it right there. You can see it's like the start at the one and the stop of the other are identical, right about there. They're identical. But it throws off our perception to have these arrows, right? This one is a better example. If I said, describe to me what's happened in this picture, you would likely say, this big monster is chasing this little monster down a tunnel, or up from a tunnel, or however you put it, right? The trickery here in this picture is that both of these monsters are the exact same size. When I put this four-way cursor on their face, I mean, you could kind of tell just based on the size of the cursor that their heads are the same size, right? So if you don't believe me, you're welcome to put a tape measure to that. But the reason that our brain sees that is, again, we see in 3 dimensions. We perceive things in third dimension. So in art class, they will teach you, in order to give something depth, right? You have a focal point here, and then you build out from it. So that's why all these lines kind of have a focal point of here, and they all come out at particular angles, right? So it's wider here on this end of the brick than it is on this end, and on this end. And as we go down, it gets narrower and narrower. And that's the case for all of these prints. And that tricks our mind into thinking we are looking down a long corridor. And then for this to be from the ceiling to the floor, but up here, he's way down here to the floor, we're saying this one is much larger, because we know if he's further back, he should be the same size. But he doesn't look like the same size, he looks bigger. So our brain is interpreting as the bigger monster and the smaller monster because it's looking in a 3-dimensional environment. But if we, again, measured everything, we can see that this one is the same size as this one. So just tricks that our brain plays. All right, more trickery. Subliminal perception. So the capacity to perceive and respond to stimuli that are presented below the threshold of awareness. So I found this. This is a normal image laid by the best. DJ flooring, and there's a woman with a martini glass, and I don't know how that's related to flooring, but if you flip this picture upside down and then you highlight a certain part of it, it kind of looks a little inappropriate, right? Look, did you see that whenever you looked at this part of the picture? I don't know, maybe you did. Do you think that this works? Do you think that advertisers put this stuff in pictures to trigger a sexual arousal so that, because that's a good feeling, right? Even if it's on like somewhat a subliminal message, I mean a subconscious level. And if I looked at this ad and I was somehow aroused by it, and then I needed a new floor, wouldn't stick out to me more than any other flooring ad? So is there truth to this? I don't know. What about this? This is one of the greatest pleasures in life, reading a book. Do you see any other image in that picture? I see an old man. I see a book here. It looks like a big book. Got his legs crossed, sitting in a grandpa type chair or whatever. I don't see anything else. I don't know what they're talking about in that picture. What about this one? Junior dance class. Here's this person. And here's this person. Whoa. It's dancing, right? That's all I'm seeing there. It's just dancing. What? This is real. You can Google this. Feel the curves, right? And here's this picture of a Coke that's in all these ice cubes. And then if you look at this ice cube, right, we talked about the light refracting through different surfaces, right? So the light refracting through these ice cubes of the Coke, right, which puts like kind of a weird thing. If you zoomed in right here, you see what looks like a fairly inappropriate picture. So this was actually a real deal where the artists that was commissioned to paint this for Coke just threw that in there because he thought it was funny. And, Coke probably didn't like that too much. This is much like what you see in all the Disney movies. You've heard like the original old Disney movies have tons of this kind of stuff in it. Whenever DVD technology came out, because remember, those movies were made before DVD. Those movies were all made for like VHS, and you can't really pause that without more sophisticated VHS equipment than what most people had. But once DVDs came popular and you could like frame by frame it, people started noticing these, and they started coming out. And it turns out that Disney artists that have to draw the same picture over and over and over, they draw 24 pictures for 1 second of film. So they draw the same picture with one slight variation, and then they draw it again with another slight variation. And 24 variations later, they get 1 second of the character moving forward or whatever it is. But it's like this picture, this picture, this picture, this. So can you imagine drawing the same picture several hundreds of times? Yeah, you're going to put a dick in that picture because, oh my God, I got to make things more fun. So, yeah, this is real. Now, does it really work on the level of subliminal advertising? No, not so much. They did a study where, so back in the day, and whenever the movies were first shipped, right, they're in these big boxes, and they have these, if you've ever seen a movie projector reel, they actually sit flat, and it looks like a big, giant, round table. And they'll take the reels, and they'll come on like 10, 12, 20, sometimes, depending on the length of the movie, different reels, and they'll take it and they'll put it in the middle and they'll wind it up, and then they have to splice this reel together with the next reel. They have like a little machine that they put it together and basically like kind of heat sinks it together or whatever, and then now that puts it, and then they wind that around, and then when they get to the end of that one, then they stitch on the next one. So again, 24 frames per second is roughly what they used to be at. And they got the idea, what if we put 2 or 3 frames spliced in those changes or whatever of like a popcorn and Coke or something like that? Would we see that, and it would be a flash of a Coke or popcorn or something? And it wouldn't be on the level of consciousness like, hey, did you see that popcorn? It wouldn't be like that. It would just be so fast that maybe our brain could perceive it, but not really understand what it perceived, and then go, kind of want some popcorn right now. I'm going to go get some popcorn. So they thought this would be brilliant, and it is brilliant, but it didn't really work. They put these subliminal advertisements in movies, and then they looked at their concession sales, and there was no change. So people weren't getting up in the middle of the movie and suddenly going and buying popcorn. All right, last thing here, extrasensory perception, or ESP. It's exactly what it sounds like, right? How many senses do we have? 5, right? Touch, sight, sound, smell, hear. So if we add a 6th sense, right? That's where that comes from, the 6th sense. So gaining information about objects, events, or another person's thoughts through some means other than the known sensory channels. So we know those 5. What if there is another means of sensing things that we don't fully understand, or maybe we don't even know that it exists? We don't know where to look for it. I have one cop story that I will put in here, and I don't know what to make of this. So one of the calls when you work the day shift in patrol that you would get pretty frequently, early start of your shift, because start shift around 7 a.m. Well, around 7 a.m. is when apartment managers usually get to their apartments, and they walk the grounds. Most of the time, this is the first thing they do. And sometimes they'll find a homeless guy that's in a vacant apartment, and they want you to run him off. Sometimes they do it themselves, but most of the time they just call you. So it's very common. First call of the day is, hey, we got a homeless guy. We just want you to make him leave. No report, no charges, no anything. At best, you might run him, see if he's wanted on any kind of warrants, which they almost always are, some minor misdemeanor, didn't pay a ticket warrant. And most of the time we don't want to deal with that anyway. So most of the time you just literally walk up, hands in your pocket, kind of kick him with your foot. Not kick him. I don't mean kick him, but I mean, you don't want to touch him with your hands, right? So you're like tap, tap, tap. And then like, huh? And you're like, hey man, you got to go. And they're like, okay. And that's it. It's super easy, and it happens once or twice a week minimum, right? So, after doing this dozens and dozens of times, you get kind of complacent, and you just do it the same way, right? You don't put a lot of thought into this call. This is just some BS thing you got to hurry up and do, and then get on to the fun stuff. So I get this call one morning, first call out of the box, and I get to the apartment, and the lady gives me the apartment number and said it's a vacant apartment. Maintenance guy found this guy in there. And I'm like, all right, I'll go get him. So I walk in, and I look in the room, and this guy's asleep, and instantly the hair on the back of my neck stood up. And it's not something I can explain. The only thing I can say that was a cognitive dissonance for me was that he was dressed pretty nice. So I didn't get the sense that this was a homeless guy. He wasn't dressed like a homeless guy. He was dressed like just your average dude. But I did think maybe it was a runaway because he looked fairly young, but I couldn't see his face. So the other thing that was a little bit strange, because who actually does this? I don't know if I can get to where you can see this, but he was like laying to where his legs were crossed, and he was laying like this with his hands back here, and he had a baseball hat on his face. So here's a baseball hat, and he's like laying there, and he's snoring. And who sleeps like that? Like, you know, we talk about relaxing and you lay back like that, but who actually sleeps like that? Nobody, right? So it's a little weird that this guy's actually sleeping in that position. But hey, good for him. He looks super relaxed. What should have happened is I should have walked up to him, tapped him with my foot, and been like, hey, man, bye. And he would have been like, oh, okay, my bad. Yes, sir. And he would have left, and that would have been it, right? Like I've done 100 times. Something told me you need to watch your six. So my first thought is I don't know who else is in this apartment. I need to go check all the rooms. I know he's asleep. Let me go. So I just checked all the rest of the rooms real quick. There's nobody else in the apartment. So now I know there's nobody behind me. And I go in to get him. And again, hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something ain't right. Don't handle this like that. And I thought, So I stood in the doorway to the bedroom that he was in. And by the way, there's no carpet. It's just concrete floor. There's just not even this. The whole thing needs to be remodeled, right? So I've got my hand on my gun, and I'm standing in the doorway, like as cover. And I went, "Hey!" like loud. And he kind of went, and he kind of startled a little bit, and his hat slid off his face. And I heard like a tink, like something hit the ground or whatever. But he just kind of froze, and his eyes got all big and everything. And again, hairs on the back of my neck, right? Like it's increasing in intensity at this point. And so I draw down on him, and I'm like, let me see your hands. And I could already kind of see his hands. It's just something that you say, right? I'm like, get up right now. And I'm yelling at him, right? And now I got to tell you, if my boss was behind me watching this, he'd have been like, what are you doing? Why are you putting your gun on this guy? He's not breaking any kind of law other than trespassing. That's not something you put him. It's not a felony arrest. You don't put your gun out. I'm sure he would have said that. And he would have been right. But again, you go with your gut, right? I'm going to go home tonight. Rules be damned, right? So I am going to handle this the way my gut's telling me to handle that. So he starts to stand up, and then he does this. And this is back to that attentional thing, right? That details. As he's getting up, I don't know if you can see this on the camera, right? I have this effects thing on so you don't see how ugly I am. But he does this thing. As he's looking, he goes, just a quick left and right glance. And it was that fast. And what that told me was he's looking for an escape route, right? I'm in the doorway. He's in the room. He looked left. He looked right. Is there any other way out of here? He's thinking about rabbiting, right? He's going to run. But he's got to know where to run. The only thing he does is run through the window. And if he does that, I'm just going to be impressed. I'm not even going to be mad. I'm going to be like, dang, that was pretty awesome. That was like Hollywood stuff, right? So I'm standing there, and I started telling him, get up against the wall. And, he's like kind of frozen in fear, doesn't really know what to do. So I kind of rushed him, and I grabbed him kind of from behind. I kind of grabbed his back here, and I kind of walked across the room from where he was, and I put him up against the wall fairly aggressively. I mean, I'm going to be honest. And I get his hand, and I get around behind his back, and I holster up as I'm getting my cuffs out. And he's not really fighting, but he's not really going along. And I get him cuffed up pretty well. And I turned and looked back to where he was sitting, and there was a gun. What happened was, this was a drug dealer. He used his own products and got high, and then decided, I'm going to sleep for a little bit. Somehow wound up in this apartment and fell asleep, but he was a little bit paranoid. So he had .38 revolver in his hand behind his head like this when he was sleeping. Now, what I didn't know at the time, I didn't know that he had the gun. I also didn't know that he had a felony warrant out for robbery. I also didn't know that he had a blue warrant out, which means that he was actually on parole, and parole had been revoked. So not only is he going to go back and serve the full term for the robbery, but he's also carrying a gun, so that's another crime, and he also had $3,000 worth of cocaine in his pocket, which is another crime. This guy's probably going to spend the rest of his life in jail. Prison, rather. So, I didn't know any of that at the time. All I know is a homeless guy, run him out. That's the information that I was given. If I would have stood over him, and I would have been, hands in my pocket, half awake, hey man, you gotta go. And he was here, and he opens his eyes, and he sees police officer, and he thinks, I ain't going back to prison for the rest of my life. I got the jump on this guy. Boom. I'm not sitting here doing this lecture for you guys. So, is there something to that hunch? Is it nothing more than a collection of nuanced details? I mean, he wasn't quite dressed like a homeless person. He was sleeping in an odd position. I'd been to this apartment before. I had never encountered this guy before. I knew most of the homeless guys on my beat. I didn't know who this guy was. Is it a collection of those details that creates a level of cognitive dissonance, which in turn we call a hunch? But then when you're on the stand, or you're in front of internal affairs on an excessive force complaint, and they say, why did you sit there with your gun pointed at this guy that was doing nothing more than, Class B misdemeanor trespassing? And the complainant didn't even want to press charges. Why? How can you explain putting your gun on this guy? Or why did you grab him and push him against the wall? And you say, well, he darted his eyes, and I thought that he was going to run. And I know that because one other time, micro story here, one other time I got a call about burglars, and I got there second. The other officer got there first, and it was a vacant house that had a big for sale sign in the front. And so, how do you burglarize a vacant house, right? So, I mean, it's possible, by the way. But you're not as, you're not as gung-ho to catch them because, it's hard to find a complainant, and usually it's a homeless person that's maybe stealing fixtures or something like that. It's a little bit more minor than somebody that actually lives there. So anyway, other officer was already in the front, and he goes, I'll go in the front, you go around to the back. I said, okay. So I go around to the back. He goes in, and I don't hear anything for, forever. He didn't get on the radio and say, come here, or anything like that. So I'm like, well, nobody ran out the back, so I don't know why he'd be searching the house by himself, but he hadn't come and got me yet, so let me go around to the front. So I go around to the front, and I hear him talking, and I go in, and he's standing in the garage. There's two dudes in the garage, and they're just having a conversation. I go, what's going on? And he goes, yeah, they're just replacing the water heater. And they were disassembling the water heater in the garage. The one guy is holding a big-ass wrench in his hand, and I just didn't like it. It was dark. There was two of them. They were both pretty big, and I don't like the fact that he had a wrench. And so I don't know who's doing what. I know you're the lead officer because you got here first, but I don't like how you're handling this. So I was like, hey, do me a favor, put that wrench down. What? Oh, yeah, my bad. He put it down right away, no problem. And I was like, hey, can we step in here so we can talk to y'all and see y'all? It's too dark in here. There's no light. So he was like, okay. So when he goes to walk by me, I just, I took him by the arm. And when I touched his arm, my first thought was, holy crap. This guy must work out constantly because every muscle in his arm is like a rock. And then it dawned on me, he was that tense. And when you're that tense, it's because you have something to hide. So sure enough, as soon as my hand touched his arm and felt how tense he was, he yanked away and took off running. And now I got to chase after somebody, which is my least favorite thing to do in the whole world. So, So yeah, I learned a lesson, if I see any hint of, and by the way, he had darted his eyes like that. And I thought, what's he looking for? And then he did that. So you learn from experience. And so from then on, one quick little glance towards a door, I know mentally he's thinking, I want to be at that door. So it's hard to explain that stuff whenever you're on a stand. It's hard to explain that to a jury. It's hard to explain that in a news interview. It's hard to explain that to internal affairs. So some of these things that, you see in the news sometimes with these police officers that do certain things that seem a little aggressive, they seem a little out of place. I know I was one of them, but I think you got to give some of these people the benefit of the doubt. Not all the time. Not every cop is good. Some of them are assholes that need to go to prison. All right, I'm not at all advocating that everything they do is right, but there are things that get done in police work that defy explanation, and sometimes it's just based on the officer's sort of ESP, if you will. All right, last thing, there's something called synesthesia. It's the capacity for experiencing unusual sensations along with ordinary ones. Basically what happens is we talked about the cross-modal thing. This is where that gets really haywire, right? This is where people will taste colors. They'll taste something and go, oh my God, I'm getting this overwhelming sensation of blue or green, or they'll see visual hallucinations along with music that they're listening to. It's called synesthesia. It can occur naturally as a neurological disease, but it's only in like 0.000001% of the population. In other words, it's only happened like a couple of dozen times in documented history. So it's very, 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 very rare. It is actually, though, quite common with people on LSD. So people that are on lysergic something acid, I forgot what LSD stands for, they get this a lot. So you'll hear a lot of people tripping on LSD that will have this synesthesia, which scares the hell out of me. I don't think I could ever do LSD. So anyway, that is sensation and perception. I have no idea how long this was, but I tried to keep it a little shorter. Hopefully it was. How do I control this? Let's see. Command, Control, and Escape. See for chapter 6.